Celeste, ahí está Dorín levantando la mano. Creo que tienes que promover la panelista para hacer las pruebas. Dorín?
Yes.
Hi, Dorín. How are you?
Fine, and you? Good morning.
Morning. We were doing some tests before to open the event.
No problem.
Thank you. We listen. We hear. We saw you perfectly.
Okay, great.
Give us some minutes. We are waiting for the two vice minister and the commissioner Arturo Robles.
Okay.
Please give us some minutes. You can choose in the interpretation choice the language of your preference. Celeste, ahí veo a Carlos Lugo y Arturo Robles para que por favor los promuevas a panelistas.
Sí, está, ya fueron promovidos.
Hola, buenos días.
Buenos días, Julián. Estimados Arturo Robles y Carlos Lugo, ¿pueden por favor abrir sus cámaras y micrófonos para verificar que les funciona correctamente?
Hola, Oscar, buenos días a todos.
Hola, Carlos. ¿Cómo te ha ido?
Muy
Buenos
bien.
días.
¿Bien? Ah, bueno. Sí, te vemos y escuchamos bien.
Perfecto.
Buenos días con todos. Hola, Oscar, ¿cómo están?
Julio, mi estimado, muy bien. Te escuchamos, pero no te vemos.
Ya, déjame ver qué está pasando. Dame 2 segundos para ver qué pasó con la pantalla. Con la cámara.
Ya.
¿Listo?
Ya. Ahora sí te vemos. Sí, perfecto. Muy bien,
Perfecto.
muchas gracias.
No te preocupes.
Comisionado Robles, ¿puede por favor abrir la micrófono y cámara para verificar?
Buenos días, ahora abro la cámara. Un minutito, estoy instalando.
Ah, bueno. Yo les voy a pedir favor a los que no van a estar hablando, colocar en mute sus micrófonos. Celeste me dice de Julissa Cruz, que se está conectando en unos minutos para que también la promuevas a panelista, por favor. Buenos días a todos. He ido saludando por separado a cada uno en la medida que se van conectando. Estamos esperando dos personas
Good
de la...
morning, everyone. I have been greeting everyone as they got connected, but we're waiting for everyone to get connected. So please give us a couple more minutes before we can get started. Thank you.
Buenos días, Oscar. Buenos días a todos. Estimados Julián, Carlos, ¿cómo están?
Muy bien, buenos días,
Señor
Arturo.
Arturo.
Julio, ¿cómo estás?
Buenos días, ¿cómo están?
Muy bien, buenos días.
Buenos días. No sé si Oscar sigues ahí. ¿Ya se me ve bien?
Ya se te ve, se te escucha perfectamente. Bueno, con Doreen hicimos pruebas al inicio, ella también está aquí conectada. Y me está diciendo el viceministro Diego Carrillo que también ya está, no lo veo acá. Viceministro Diego, ¿puede abrir la cámara y micrófono para probar, por favor?
¿Qué tal? Buenos días y buenos días a todos los que están conectados.
Mi estimado Diego, te vemos bien, pero se escucha un poco bajo el audio.
A ver, denme un segundo.
Ahí de pronto cuando te acerca el micrófono se escucha mejor,
Sí, a ver, ¿ahora me escuchan bien?
mucho mejor.
Listo, gracias.
Gracias.
Buenos días, Doreen. Hi, Doreen. How are you?
Hola, buenos días. Muy bien, gracias.
Congratulations. Felicidades por tu nominación.
Muchas
Muy
gracias.
contentos todos.
Yo también.
Ahora tendremos un esfuerzo que hacer, Doreen, ¿cierto? Al igual que hace 4 años.
Give me a couple more minutes because Julissa Cruz is about to get logged in. Remember that she is one of the people who promoted the work within the PCC1, and she will be presenting part of the presentation today. So give us a couple more minutes before we get started. I'm sorry, do we need to change our names or is that not necessary? No, it isn't. Whenever we have formal PCC meetings, yes, we do need to change your names to make sure that everybody is well identified. But because this is a webinar and you will be participating, we don't need to make any changes to your names. So the names that you have chosen to log in are okay. Thank you. We'll be asking you to turn on your cameras based on the order that we have. Today, I will get started, and then we have Julissa, and then we have Carlos Lugo. So as I call your names, I will ask you to please turn on your cameras so we can get started. Give me 1 second, please. Good morning, everyone. I was making sure that everything is working. I want to make sure that in order for communication to take place, for you to choose a language that you want to listen to and speak in. As you can see over here on the screen, what you have to do to choose a proper language, whether you're going to speak and listen in Spanish or in English, you will find a button that you can click on, the interpretation button, and you can choose English or Spanish. And do remember, in order to facilitate communication, everybody needs to be able to do this. So make sure that you... Okay, then good morning, everyone, and welcome to this seminar. Now that we have shared with everyone the instructions, I want to formally welcome you to this virtual seminar. At some point, we wanted to do this face-to-face, but because of the pandemic, we decided to do this virtually. And it's about this interest that we all share in order to provide connectivity to rural areas that are far away. We want all participants, as we previously mentioned, to make sure to have their cameras off and only turn them on when it is your turn to participate in the activity. And in that sense, Maria Celeste, I want to ask you to help me so that I can share with everyone the agenda for today. Before, okay, well, first of all, let me explain the agenda and then make a brief statement to get started. First, I want to thank all the authorities, all the member states, all the associate members, and all the participants who are here with us today, joining us in this initiative. I think it is really important for us to look for mechanisms to carry out concrete actions that can help us reach our goal. This goal that we all have to provide connectivity in remote areas or in areas do not have access to ICTs. First of all, I will make a brief statement, then we will have the Executive Director of INDOTEL, Julissa Cruz from Dominican Republic, because she is in charge of the rapporteurs on broadband, universal access, digital inclusion, and gender equality. And this is exactly where this process got started about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And I will tell you a bit more about it. After that, we will have a presentation from the document that this initiative is based on, where we actually try to present the concrete actions that were recommended. And in order to do that, the best person to present it is the person who actually organized all these activities, Mr. Carlos Lugo, the commissioner for the Communications Regulation Commissions. As a commissioner, he will be briefly explaining this document. After that, we will have 2 panels. So when we get to each panel, I will be presenting the speakers and who will be communicating and sharing their results. So first, I want to very briefly remind you about this very important initiative that we have discussed several times. And it's that we all have a common goal. We all have this goal of providing connectivity and reducing and bridging the digital divide in our countries. But unfortunately, we come across situations that, for many reasons, make it so that this process becomes limited, or there are boundaries and obstacles for them. Sometimes because we don't have sufficient resources, sometimes because for one reason or another, it is necessary to update policies and regulations, perhaps because they're too old-fashioned and they need to become more flexible. And we actually realized this throughout the pandemic, because many of the actions that governments had taken before were put to the test, and we realized that they needed to adjust better to the reality of our context. And also because many times reaching municipalities and localities implies us meeting certain other boundaries. This is something, of course, that we will discuss more in detail in the second panel, but I think that that's one of the biggest goals that we have for today. And I do want to remind you that the CITEL has already carried out multiple resolutions, and we have mentioned that we needed to ensure access that is equitable to ICTs and telecommunication services that minimize poverty and social inequality among different communities. We have also carried out other recommendations, such as the one that we carried out in 2018, where we decided to recommend all the member states of the OAS to facilitate the development of regulation models that help deploying infrastructure in remote or neglected rural areas. And because of all this effort, among the recommendations that were discussed and were approved both within the consulting committee, both in 1 and 2, in the one that has to do with radio communications and communication technologies, we then brought up those proposals all the way to the executive board, and then the secretariat shared this document in order for the General Assembly of the OAS to evaluate these proposals. But I don't want to say anything else. I just wanted to tell you a bit about where we stand with these recommendations. And now I want to yield the floor to my friend Julissa Cruz, who has been helping us throughout the rapporteurship on broadband and has been helping us provide continuity to our work. Thank you, Julissa. Thank you, Oscar. Good morning, everyone. It is a true pleasure to be with you today. Sadly, it's virtual, but hopefully in our next sessions and in our next encounters, we will be able to see each other face to face and hold each other just as we want to. I won't be taking too much of your time because really the important part of this report will be presented by our dear friend Carlos Lugo. But I do want to go through the work that was done through the reportship on broadband, universal access, digital inclusion, and gender equality, referring to carry out actions to connect the unconnected in remote rural areas. And basically the goal is to present all the different activities that we carried out in the rapporteurship. And first, we want to mention the origin of our efforts and our initiative. This was something that carried out in the 34th meeting of the PCC1 that approved decision number 289 to identify better practices to improve rural connectivity in the region, that decided to order the rapporteurship on broadband universal access, digital inclusion, and gender equality according to the mandate and reference terms to collect the best practices that would allow bridging the digital divide, improve coverage, universalize telecommunication services by identifying the development of models that allow to reduce the digital divide by connecting the unconnected in neglected or insufficiently attended rural areas. Apart from that, we have invited member states and associate states to contribute and actively participate in this process. And luckily, this was done so. We have gotten tremendous support from all the administrations from the member states. Once the 289 decision was approved, a work group was set up with the participation of member states and associate members to collect better practices that allow for improving coverage, universalizing services, and identifying the development. I'm sorry, her microphone is off. We cannot hear her. I am so sorry about that. So as I was saying, this particular document has allowed for us to collect the better practices to reach this goal that we have in common. So in the 37th meeting of the PCC1, the Colombian delegation presented a report that collected the better practices. And the information that was gathered came from 25 countries and organizations from Latin America. And the first part of the document sets up the status quo of connectivity in rural areas of the region. Then it discusses funds and efficiency of the universal access funds. Then the document presents cases of connectivity in rural access projects among those countries, carried out both by governments as well as from other stakeholders in the ecosystem through community networks. Afterwards, this document compiles the main obstacles that were identified in each case, listing the different kinds of technology that are used in all of these projects and different aspects referring to the regulations for each of those countries that incentivize rural connectivity. So this development of community networks, if you will. By the end of this document, there is a particular section on the way that spectrum is managed and administered in rural areas, presenting different cases from the region. And then afterwards, in that same session, in session number 37th, the recommendation number 30 was approved with initiatives to expand telecommunications in rural areas that are neglected or insufficiently attended. There were 17 initiatives there in the area of regulation policies for connectivity in rural areas and in areas that are neglected or insufficiently attended to. And in that meeting, in decision 309, the PCC2 received the report to improve the coverage and identify the development of models to help reduce the digital divide, connecting the unconnected and neglected or insufficiently attended rural areas. And out of that, there was also a recommendation to expand telecommunications in rural areas or in neglected or insufficiently attended areas. In meeting number 36 of the PCC2, recommendation 63 was approved with initiatives on the radioelectric spectrum to expand telecommunications in those areas. That recommendation has been considered based on 4 initiatives on the radioelectrical spectrum as it was carried out in the PCC1 and PCC2, who also approved decision 216, where the CITEL Secretariat is ordered to share that recommendation to the Assembly. Also, the Secretariat is asked to send all the way to CITEL the recommendations regarding the subject, which were approved in meetings number 36 and 37. And lastly, it is requested to assess these recommendations in the OAS General Assembly. Now, in meeting 37, the resolution was approved to look at the initiatives to expand telecommunications in rural areas and in neglected or insufficiently attended to rural areas, and to have those recommendations be assessed by the General Assembly of the OAS, which will take place in July 2021. This resolution project has the 21 initiatives that were previously authorized by PCC1, and we will present them now. First, we want to promote the use of universal access funds or help funds for connectivity projects that target rural remote areas that are neglected or insufficiently tended to, and have a way to access all kinds of operators to foster and implement business models that motivate the entry of new economic agents and promote their financial sustainability. 3, to encourage the discussion in the region's countries regarding the analysis of fiscal measures to promote and favor connectivity. 4, for rural connectivity policies to give priority to technologies and projects that show sustainability, efficiency, and rapid implementation in rural areas. 5, to boost public and private investment, as well as public-private ventures, partnerships, and also the sharing of infrastructure in rural areas. 6, to promote local innovation ecosystem, as well as strategies for ownership of technology in rural areas. 7, to provide incentives for the participation of small and community operators in providing services to unserved areas through specific licensing measures, access to key infrastructure, and social coverage promotion programs. 8, to promote the cooperation and dismantling of barriers to the deployment of infrastructure between central and local governments to resolve the issues of permits and rights of way. 9, to promote the drafting of guides on best practices for the deployment of infrastructure, as well as the standardization of local requirements and regulations. 10, to periodically examine the regulation applicable to rural connectivity in order to respond quickly to the specific demands and needs of connectivity in rural areas. 11, to adapt minimum standards of service quality, speed, and continuity of service in rural communities. 12, to promote specific incentives for rural areas such as investments, rates, contributions, etc. 13, to continually measure the progress of projects in order to foster connectivity, publish their reports systematically and continually, measure their impact, and adopt necessary corrective measures, if any. 14, to foster the development of a connectivity mapping system that identifies the places where there is installed infrastructure and connectivity. 15, creating a regulatory environment that fosters innovation and investment for technological development, analyzing all the technological offers for connectivity in accordance with the needs of each country. 16, analyze the relevance of allowing operators to partially or totally allocate the due contribution amount to access and universal service funds for rural connectivity projects defined by connectivity policies in accordance with the needs of each country. 17, consider the possibility, if the policies and laws of each country allow for it, for enterprises that have deployed connectivity in rural areas to be exempted from the mandatory contribution to universal access and service funds. 18, to consider incentives for suitable use of the radioelectric spectrum to expand the coverage of affordable, quality telecommunication and ICT services, implementing flexible regulatory frameworks that facilitate access to service, and the use of radioelectric spectrum in order to encourage investment in these areas and promote compliance with service coverage obligations. 19, to consider alternative innovative models for assignments, licensing, and payment for the use of radioelectric spectrum, which would aim to facilitate the expansion of coverage. 20, to consider policies to promote targeted investments aimed at satellite and terrestrial solutions, including aeronautic stratospheric platforms, among others, of course, that could provide telecommunications and ICT services in the short term. And lastly, 21 is to consider implementing new technologies and techniques for dynamic management of licensed and license-exempt radioelectric spectrum to enable its flexible and shared use.
In the meeting of the PCC1, number 35, resolution number 303 was approved, which determined the seminar of Connecting the Unconnected in rural and faraway areas. In the 36th meeting of the PCC1, that was done. But given the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, it wasn't possible to have this seminar at the time. Therefore, in meeting number 37, it was approved in the 309 resolution, the new date for the seminar for Connecting the Unconnected in rural and faraway areas to be done in the 38th meeting. This seminar is an initiative for the project of this reportership, which has been done to have contributions in the region of the Americas for the preparation meetings for the World Meeting on Development of Telecommunication for the Americas. So with this is the end of this report of the reportership, and I will now have Oscar speak for the presentation of our dear Carlos Lugo and the report. Thank you very much, Julissa, for your words. As you're all listening, many numbers of resolutions, recommendations for why do we do this? Because our INDOTEL director wants to show us that we have the support and that we have that formal work within the framework of the member states, of the OAS and member states. So while we prepare, while Carlos Lugo prepares, maybe we could have the logo of the event on screen. So while the logo appears, I want to tell you that right now we have around 155 people connected. And additionally, we are broadcasting this. So you can write on the chat. We have the report of the directorship, and we would like you to ask any questions. I want to thank the Internet Society and Telefonica precisely for joining us and being with us during this process and in its preparation. I wanted to thank those two members who have been joining us during this road and helped us have this seminar today. So now I would like to have Carlos Lugo speak, who has been coordinating and leading the support and also working on the drafts that were presented. We also had Alejandro Delgado, who also worked many hours for this. Carlos, could you please put your camera up a bit? Perfect. So after Carlos Lugo, I will ask all the panelists to turn on their cameras so that we can take a picture and we can use that on social networks. I would like to ask something and to see if I could share my screen to share a small presentation. Yes, I need to confirm that, but I think that you've already been given the... So you could, let's see if you can do that, but you could just share your screen apparently. Can you confirm that? Okay. So firstly, good morning. Hi, everyone. It's a privilege for me, and it's very exciting to be here sharing with you. Without our usual coffees during the breaks, unfortunately, and without being able to hug each other and have those long days of talking in the halls of the events. However, we hope that that comes back, because even though I do believe in remote work and online work, I'm a #1 fan for this type of relationship instances. I think that it's fundamental to be able to have that connection and to work on those friendships, which are good for our sector and for the rights of citizens. I think that for what we do, it's something that is good for everyone. So I would like to say hi to Julissa, León, Julio, everyone who's here today as a panelist of this seminar, and everyone who is watching. Today, I will basically show you in a brief way, in a summarized way, what we did during this time that we were working in this document and during this effort. And I think that it's fundamental to start with a reflection that is not included in the presentation, but it's my main message for everyone, for all the member states of the CITEL and for all the organizations. Firstly, to think that the development, the economical development of our countries, and this is something that the UN has showed in its latest report, and a lot of studies that also have been discussed. It depends certainly on the sophistication level and the development level of digital technologies. And for those benefits and that development to be able to reach all citizens, they have to be connected. We need to be aware that in this digital era, they're not first-class and second-class citizens. We need to have equality in the access to technologies and to the benefits of technology. We all have to be digital citizens. The citizen that nowadays, in the near future, cannot reach that digital citizenship will have their rights affected. And I think that this effort doesn't have to scare us. We cannot hinder the development of these reforms that we want to make in our countries. And this is evident in this document. We need to not be afraid of failure. Even if we propose ideas and strategies that in the end don't work the way we intended them to, but we still need to innovate in this. And we need to work for the citizens. And this is fundamental. To have a new vision of the radioelectric spectrum, I think that is one of the conclusions that were very important in this study. To have a new vision of how to access them so that rural areas that nowadays, unfortunately, the citizens there are not connected. We need to have them reach the benefits of digitalization and this transformation, this digital transformation. We need to have this done and guarantee their rights. This is what we need to care about. We don't have to be scared of implementing reforms in our countries. Decisions are urgent and we cannot wait any longer. Today we will present a summary of the document, and at the end, all the best practices and all the examples and recommendations. And these are not an impediment for us or a limitation. It's a joint work where all the groups and stakeholders were able to propose ideas and recommendations for the countries, which we will analyze for each of them. And each country can select and analyze this and adapt it to its own place, its own country. This is the main objective of this work. We need to innovate even more to connect the unconnected. We haven't done enough, and we need to recognize that. If we had done enough, then we would have been able to achieve connectivity, and we would be further advanced. So this document now is a reference, and it's of vital importance for our work in the region. As Julissa said, and Oscar also anticipated in this work, we had more than 25 countries participate in it and members associated to the CITEL, which deserves an important recognition for all of you. It was 18 months of work, which were very intense with lots of discussions, technical discussions, where everyone had the possibility of proposing and discussing and reaching agreements. And that is what gives it its main value. This document of best practices was published to reduce the digital divide of the unconnected in rural areas, in neglected areas and underserved areas. As Julissa said, this became a recommendation of our assembly in the OAS. And it's also important to say that this document regarding spectrum was discussed in the PCC too. And therefore, it is a very big document, which is a work of the joint committees. This is an important topic, and this is where I start with the summary, just to illustrate, because we have access to the document and we can then deepen on each topic. But for this presentation, we wanted to start sort of a quick recap of the topics regarding the universal funds, how it's being funded, what projects are being funded, because then we can take a look at the initiatives and the successful initiatives in different countries. As we know, these funds are funds that are generally funded by the state. Others are done through the payments of fines, other fees, and different kinds of payments. Others have been funded by international organizations, both public and private ones, and you can see in the document all the portfolio of the funds. And you will also see in a part of the document the ways of intervention of these funds, of these access funds. And I wanted to bring today some examples to highlight of what you will find in the document. for example, the shared network of telecommunications of Mexico, also the high tension electricity project, cases in which the state is still intervening, for example, in Colombia, Chile, Argentina. Also models such as the one of connecting education centers and different public centers such as libraries, police stations, to be able to have those community points of access to the internet. So those are all the things that you can find in the document. That's the summary of that. The community access to the internet. You will also find cases such as the creation of areas of Wi-Fi and free access to the internet. So Carlos, we just see the first slide of your presentation. It hasn't been moving, so we haven't seen any changes there. Okay, let me see. And now? No, okay, now yes, we see. So if I move it, can you see that? Yes, okay. So Zoom made me updated, so now the new version is a bit confusing. So continuing with the cases, we will find also in the document the creation of free access to the internet, for example, in Panama, Chile, and Colombia. It's also included all the policies of giving terminals to people and students in our countries. Projects, for example, the one of Uruguay and Colombia for people with disabilities. And I would also like to highlight some other very interesting cases, which can also be an example for the implementation of these changes in the public policies and the regulation of our countries. In the first place, cases in which the project, projects in which the state facilitates the project. For example, in Mexico, with the concessions for social use, which give that right of providing telecommunication access, and also non-profit organizations. And I want to highlight these cases where there is a different administration of the radioelectric spectrum as fundamental cases which we need to implement in our countries. And I think that the document provides that information, which can be a guide for us and can be very helpful for us in fundamental projects in which the spectrum is authorized in specific areas. Of course, we are including in this document all the satellite internet projects. I think that is something that is on the way. Many projects that haven't maybe reached Latin America, but I think that that can be very useful also as a guide, as interesting cases of what's happening in the world, not just in our region. Also, the equipment of the TIC equipment, the ICT equipment for the elderly is also something interesting that you can find in the document. Something that is very important to highlight are the projects where financing is given to businesses or people to deploy the update of networks of access with very few inhabitants. So those neglected areas can be a very interesting model, which we can also find within the document. Or we can also find innovative projects where, for example, tenders where different localities are made compete for the projects of connectivity, and projects that have the purpose of incrementing the coverage and access of places with low population, with a productive focus in the region. So countries are doing interesting things, and we can share those best practices as we see there. Some topics that we will see now in the document, some cases that you will find as good practices, are the also fiscal incentives in faraway areas or rural areas. This is, for example, an incentive that Brazil had And it's something very important to achieve that quick closure of the digital divide in those areas. Also, the prioritization of this in rural areas in places like Brazil. Also, the, for example, obligations of deployment of broadband in terms of quality, and taking into account the violation of the protection of the users.
Wi-Fi solutions, telecommunication projects, and here comes another important aspect to consider, I think, in this near future, and that's the telecommunication projects that are communitary. That is something that we have been able to identify in the work that we were doing, this need to have community network telecommunication projects in neglected or underserved rural areas. One example that we found was the case of Dominican Republic, for example. Then we need funds to move forward with 4G services, especially in rural areas that are underserved or neglected when there is no case of governmental support, as is the case of the US, and then to provide public access solutions to the internet where the project operator can commercialize it. So within the good practices and better practices, we found the need to have new sustainability models for these projects and these networks that can guarantee that these areas with low income and low inhabitant density can become sustainable. Then we want to focus on investing for impact, aligning our programs and digital investments to areas where there is a limited commercial case. So we also worked not just on public programs that many times do not become consolidated as state policies. And this is something that we need to become aware of. Sometimes they transform and they become affected by the change in governments, but we also focus on the private sector as well. The private sector is fundamental in order to bridge the digital divide, and they will become also benefited by a more digital connected community. So we know that there are cases such as the case of Facebook that has carried out multiple connectivity projects and has supported the development of technologies such as Internet for Everyone, Magma Technology, Express Wi-Fi, HASPS. There are examples of Telefonica as well, the community networks in Mexico. We know the case of Telefonica. That is something that we will discuss later on in our document. But what I want to show is that we have a rich document that has good practices and that can help us become a guideline for new policies and new regulations in our countries. And of course, we know that there are many cases of community networks that we can discuss later on. But as Oscar was mentioning, there are many roadblocks ahead and we need to be aware of them. And that's something that is established in the report. And in many cases, we are even making constitutional modifications that would enable us to generate autonomy in the use of soils. We should not be afraid of discussing this when we're discussing internet governance. There are no structures and there are no pillars that should remain unchanged if we want to bring progress for every citizen of the world. So if we want to do that, we need to revise those pillars that are now roadblocks, such as the case of regional authority in the management of soil, in the deployment of telecommunication infrastructures. So many times we come across roadblocks in the deployment of infrastructure. We also find many times that the connectivity information is not updated or is inconsistent. We know that the regulator then and the public policy makers need to be digitalized and they need to be transformed. We also know that there are roadblocks in logistics, there are roadblocks in the relationships that we have with local governments. We have regulations that have become obsolete, which makes regulators look into modifying their regulations. Some countries have done this, some countries have not. There are roadblocks with getting permits from land authorities. There are poor conditions of the center provision centers. And in some countries, sometimes the use of the funds are not necessarily well utilized. There are cases of prior consultations that focus especially on the human rights of minority populations, and that's something that is important. But of course, sometimes they can become a roadblock. So because this has the experiences of all the members, there are different cases. But this is a guide that we can use in order to ask for help, depending on what are the kinds of experiences that we have and whether or not they're similar to the experiences of other countries. But I think that to wrap it up and to move into the technologies, I don't want to go into each technology and specify them because you all know them. But the fundamental message of this document is that there is a wide array of technologies that allow us to adopt multiple technology models in our efforts to achieve rural connectivity. So it's not just optical fiber, it's not just wireless or mobile lines. There is a wide variety of services that are satellite services. There are multiple networks and multiple technologies available to us in our countries, and that they even be combined. And that's something that is also offered within the document as a response, as a technical recommendation, and as technical good practices that can be useful for us. And we also want to highlight that the document also discusses the spectrum allocation. Of course, we discuss the commitments of investment for these rural areas, but undoubtedly, as part of the document, we also find recommendations that have to do with different fees that are differentiated for rural areas, spaces like white spaces, not charging for the spectrum for social concessions. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. You know, we should move a bit away from the notion of using the spectrum only when it is paid. Perhaps we should discuss how to have those providers to start using part of their spectrum for rural areas. So there are multiple recommendations, but I won't go into them because Julissa read them. But I do want to show them here on the screen, making sure that we highlight that these recommendations should be taken when we discuss this topic, when we innovate in public policies, in order for us to get rural and local innovation ecosystems that are based on connectivity. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Oscar, for allowing me to present this document. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos, for your presentation. Thank you for your summary. There are multiple questions in the Q&A area where you were asking to get the document with the recommendations. They have already been shared with you through the chat box. You can find them over there. They're available both in English and in Spanish. You can find them in the CITEL website. If you have any issues logging into them, please do tell me because we can share them again. Maria Celeste, if you know, Vice Minister Diego Carrillo had to switch computers, so please make sure that you add him as a panelist so that he can present. And now I want all the members of the panels, Carlos and Julissa, to turn on your cameras because we will be now taking a picture for the event to share it through social media. So if you guys could please turn on your cameras. I think some of the panel members are not here. If you are there, if you're connected as attendees, make sure to raise your hand so we can change your role to panelist. We now have over 160 participants, and I think someone can hear an echo. Perhaps there is a mic that is on. Someone is raising their hand. I don't know what's going on. There is a participant that is an attendee that has his hand up. Please make sure to turn them into panelists. We also have panelists over here who are in the second panel who have not turned their cameras on. Please make sure to turn your camera on so that everyone appears in the picture. Thank you, Jane. Jane, your camera is a bit low. Could you please move it so we can see your face? Thank you, Jane. Santiago, if you could please also move your camera a bit. Teresa Gomez. Marta Suarez, we see that you are connected, but we can't see your video. Okay, you're there. I don't know if anyone else is missing. Okay, well, thank you all for turning on your cameras. I will now take a screenshot with all of you here. Please smile. Thank you. So we got your best picture, I think. We will be sharing this through social media. And if you're tweeting or retweeting this, remember that our account is at OEA_CITEL. So make sure that you tag us too. Thank you, Julissa. Thank you, Carlos. We will now get started with our first panel. I want to welcome the authorities that are joining us today for this first panel, who will be participating in this first stage that we called a panel of authorities toward hemispheric cooperation. Today, we will be joined by Mr. Julio Munoz, the Vice Minister of Information and Communication Technologies of the Ministry of Telecommunications of Ecuador, Vice Minister Diego Carrillo, the Vice Minister of Communications of the Ministry of Transport and Communications of Peru, and our current chair of the PCC1. We will also be joined by Commissioner Arturo Robles, the Commissioner of the Federal Institute of Telecommunications of Mexico, and our current chair of the PCC2 on radio communications, and Ms. Doreen Bogdan, the Director of the ITU, and who I also want to congratulate for appointment as General Secretariat of the ITU. Without further ado, I don't want to continue with introductions. I just want to get started. I want to remind you that the panel will last 60 minutes, and for that we will have 2 rounds. In the first round, each panelist will have exactly 8 minutes to present what they believe to be, based on their experience and the work that they have done, the best practices and policies, models, and projects to bridge the digital divide. And then in the second round, each panelist will have 4 minutes to propose mechanisms that can allow for effective cooperation in the hemisphere, or for synergies between countries to quickly meet the goal of connecting the unconnected. All the panelists must bear in mind the initiatives that have already been presented in detail by Julissa, Cruz, and by Carlos Lugo. So without further ado, let's get started. You will see a timer on screen to remind you how you are doing on your time. We will start in the order that you will mention. So Vice Minister Julio Munoz, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Oscar. Thank you to all the authorities who have joined us today. It is a true joy for Ecuador to share this space with you and to talk about connecting the unconnected, to discuss connecting rural areas. I think that that's what drives the work that we're doing in Ecuador around telecommunications. In that sense, Ecuador in 2019 created a policy for Digital Ecuador. This is a planning element that will help us get Ecuador become a digital Ecuador. First, we want Ecuador to be connected. We want to bridge the digital divide. We want to bridge connectivity divides as well. We want Ecuador to be efficient, so we want the electronic government to have a significant presence, and we have made a lot of progress in that area because over 75% of all the business carried out by the government can be done online right now. And then the third axis is to have an innovative, competitive Ecuador. We want to have smart cities, we want to have e-commerce, and we want those aspects to become fundamental for the life of our country. But of course, the trigger that we found for this digital transformation is to have connectivity. If we do not have connectivity, we cannot talk about digital transformation, and we cannot talk about guaranteeing rights, such as the right to digital education, to digital medicine as well, that in the case of the pandemic has been able to help us move away from the face-to-face work. You know, we had meetings that were face-to-face and they were very complex, and now we are virtually connected to everyone across the world at any time of the day, and that has become extremely helpful for us, and it has helped us become more productive as well. And I think that, as I was saying, in that sense, Ecuador has made a lot of progress. Currently, 60% of all Ecuadorian citizens have access to 4G broadband. 98% of the population has access to cellular coverage, either in 2G or 3G, but we want to continue moving forward. We want to provide access to 4G because that opens the door for more options. We have already deployed fiber optic. We have grown by 94% between 2017 and 2020. We have deployed over 2,015,000 kilometers of fiber optic. And this creates an ecosystem and a context that allows for people to access the benefits of the digital world in order to bridge the digital divide in our country. It is also significant for us to think about how cooperation and public-private cooperation has been promoted by the national Ecuadorian government and by the minister and the Ministry of Telecommunications. And this is a strategy that has not only been applied by Ecuador, because multiple other countries have also decided that it was important to share the infrastructure of the ISPs and telecommunication operators and the government. We have actually been able to provide connectivity for over 100 different parishes of the country just by reaching agreements between the regulatory agencies and the telecommunications industries. Of course, the challenge ahead is big. We have tried to find multiple projects in order to be able to reach rural areas, in particular in the country. And one particular project called Connecting Communities is a case of the work that we're doing that implies the cooperation of local governments, the central government, and public telecommunication companies that have allowed to have massive Wi-Fi points throughout the country. We're perhaps not reaching homes, but we are reaching communities in general by using multiple technologies. And by doing that, communities now have access to education and digital online services. They have people have been able to do remote work, and they have been able to use the multiple services of e-government as well. So by the beginning of 2017, we should remember that only 20% of municipalities in my countries had strategies to massify free Wi-Fi spots in the country. And currently over 75% of our municipalities have a strategy for connectivity for their communities. But we do need to continue doing work. There is still room for us to continue having massive 4G connectivity throughout the country. We want to continue providing massive connectivity through fiber optic. We want to continue expanding on the fiber optic that has already been deployed. There is another project that is a social project that we have are the info centers. They are spaces where people within their communities can go to a particular center in order to access services. They can access connectivity. They can even access a computer. So it is, and they have someone that helps them use those computers. So we have facilitators as well. And we have over 180 info centers in Ecuador, and they cover over 70% of rural parishes in our country. And we want to double down on that work that we're doing despite the economic issues that those regions are having. But this is a process, I think, that was even more boosted because of the vaccination processes. We are having the senior citizens of the country go into the info centers in order for them to register for vaccination, and that has been significant for us. Another big divide that we find has to do with accessing equipment. Sometimes equipment is expensive, so we cannot actually bridge that digital divide, and we cannot necessarily fight against digital illiteracy, which is why we decided to remove all taxes in order to import tablets, cell phones, and computers. In that way, we can make the market more dynamic and reduce prices. Along those same lines, we decided to reduce the value of getting authorizations for buying cell phones by 0%. So you can buy whichever cell phone you want in another country and bring it without having to pay any taxes. And we have been working together with the industry in order to have a new taxing and tariff regulation. And for that, I want to thank all the work that we have done along with the ITU and all the work that they have done along with us in order to validate the broadbands. So what I would say is that this dynamic shift that allows for moving from a model that is looking to get profit to a model that is fostering connectivity allows to really benefit rural areas in order to create necessary incentives for the industry to be deployed in those sectors. And I believe that it is significant for this decision to cooperate and work alongside the industry can definitely make us reach our goals and help us manage to connect the unconnected. And something significant is that within Ecuador, we are proposing having a Latin American fund for rural transformation and rural connectivity. Of course, we will discuss this later on in our second part of the presentation, but we should show this because this is a reality of Ecuador, but this is also a reality for all the citizens of Latin America who do not have internet access. We need to continue working together and collaborating with international cooperation, the private sector, and governments in order to make sure that those over 30 million children who do not have connectivity and who cannot study right now be able to study. And these should not be government policies. These should be state policies because this digital divide is no longer just a digital divide, it's a social divide. Those people who have connectivity have been given access to their own rights, the rights of education and the right to medicine, but others have not. So thank you everyone in the work that you're doing, and we will continue discussing more about our projects of Ecuador later on.
Oscar, you're on mute. Can you hear me now? Sorry. Thank you very much, Julio, for explaining what has been done in Ecuador. We are working with the government of Ecuador precisely to be able to see how we can implement these initiatives that were presented before to connect the unconnected. So we are in this process of reviewing the topics of the agreement, and we are inviting the members of the CITEL to join us in this process. Now we'll have the Vice Minister of Communications, the MTC of Peru, Diego Carrillo. I don't know if everyone can see the chronometer on the screen, but we have that in order to check it. So Diego, you can have the floor. Can you hear me well? Well, first of all, I would like to thank Oscar and the Inter-American Commission of Telecommunications of the OAS for organizing this event and for the very good organization that has been done to share practices in the region. I would also like to say hi to Julio Muñoz, Julio Robles, and the director of the OIT, and also to thank you for your participation. In the case of Peru, it's quite along the lines of what Julissa said at the beginning of the event. We have been developing a series of strategies that are related to this list of initiatives and recommendations that the state members of the OAS said. There are three main axes that I will summarize now to make it quite didactic and to show what the government of Peru has been boosting. The first block is related to a particular interest that we have in the Ministry of Transport and Communications, which is to foster private investments that are aligned with the objective of public policies, which, as it was said before, is logically related and prioritized to connect the areas that are currently not connected in our country, especially in rural areas, which are the places with the biggest digital divide and connectivity divide. And in that package, we would like to foster those private investments to be directed towards what we have as public policies. We had a very important decision this year in Peru, which is to renovate some of the decisions we have in January and February. We included some strategies. The first one is related to improve the methodology that we nowadays have to convert the canon that the operators pay for radioelectric spectrum and to turn that into investments for areas which need a bigger infrastructure in telecommunications. That is something that is being done to reach agreements with the operators to reduce this payment, but turn it into investment commitment. And we are trying to reach amounts that are 20 times more than what was being done in previous years. Another mechanism that we also have in this package is to make renewals of titles with also commitments of investment. And this is also something that during the year will allow us to renew this and have this that was pending be fostered and to boost this private investments in areas where we want to advance public policy. The other point is to have tenders or auctions of the radioelectric spectrum. We are trying to have the summons by the end of April to have an auction of the spectrum for like around 3 gigahertz, which is related with commitments of investment and not payments in cash for the spectrum. So within this package of the initiatives that we are boosting and fostering, what we are projecting for this year is to get 1,500 million soles in investments and direct investments in rural areas for the conversion of payments for the rights of use of the radioelectric spectrum, and which will allow us to reach more than 2,500 rural areas in the country with an estimate impact of around 1 million people. So this is one first thing that is aligned with the policies and initiatives that at the moment were talked about at the beginning of the meeting, which is related to promote mechanisms that are more agile for private investments to be directed to areas where the services can be expanded, which is what in the end, without the intervention of the state, maybe it won't be resolved in the short term, but, or maybe when it's solved, it will be a longer term that's necessary. A second axis is related with public investments that have been done from the ministry's side, but which also have the focus of making the investments of the private sector more dynamic. So without going into much detail, but basically we have a fund that is called CITEL, and it's fed by the contributions of private operators. We also have a portfolio of projects, of regional projects, which are about broadband installation and transport of fiber optics, and to bring connectivity to more than 6,000 schools, 2,000 medical centers, and police offices in rural areas of the country. But part of what we're doing there, part of reactivating and fostering that, last year we had around 3 projects in operation in 3 areas of the 24 regions of the country. And we hope by July to have around 12 projects, to have 12 regions, which are half of the country, with projects of installation of fiber optics in operation. And by the end of the year, around 17. But the most important thing is that part of this figure, what it allows us to do, and we have seen the first projects do this, and I think that is a good practice that we can highlight, how now with the figure that we have in Peru that is very good for the rural areas, and is operators who have the title and are available to implement infrastructure of telecommunications in rural areas, and which can be connected to the mobile operators of the network. Those in practice, once the public projects are in operation, they are connecting and linking with our public networks to the effects of using towers that are now being able to become 4G. So that's an initial stage, but we are seeing that there is a very positive impact, and we want to promote that and foster that to have a bigger impact than just fixed connection impact. We want to be able to bring higher quality internet and have this technological improvement that we need of the antennas in our country. And the last point to finish is related with something that's not less important, but was also mentioned by the Minister Muñoz before, which has to do with capabilities, digital capabilities. We are now really boosting this in a very strong way. We launched a program that is called Everyone Connected, Todos Conectados, which has 2 main axes. One is to boost what we call CATs, or like the digital access centers, which is something that is already known as the community digital centers. As the Vice Minister of Ecuador said, they also have that, or in Colombia, they have those telecenters in Brazil, for example. So it's an experience that we're having in the region, and it's been done. And we should have around 500 centers in already active. And by next year, we should have 1,000. So by June, and we prioritize this as a public policy because given the pandemic, traditionally it's understood that it has to do with access, but the truth is that people are essential, and the development of these capabilities is essential to have an impact just in Peru. Something interesting to mention is that the numbers, before the pandemic and now, there are a lot more people who are using the internet that before didn't use it before the pandemic. And that's a very interesting thing, because even though it has to do with initiatives of the state and the private sector, many of those people had the capability of connecting before the pandemic and didn't do it because of a lack of interest, or basically because they didn't have this need. And this tells us that as a policy, we need to focus more on that. And just to close, the last point has to do with 6,500 points of internet in public squares and in rural areas as well. There is a package of 3,500 that the ministry will implement during this year. In April, we will actually start to implement 300, and then we will continue progressively to do it until the end of the year. This is a big challenge that we should mention, and it has to do with generating the socialization of that in order for it to be used, because it will allow us to overcome this barrier of access, but at the same time, we will also have to have campaigns so that its use is more extended. So that, Oscar, is basically on the side of Peru. And we should say that the policies that we have been working on are directly aligned with what was approved by the member states of the OAS and the work that's been done by CITEL. And of course, the commitment is to continue fostering all those initiatives that are especially related with connecting the unconnected and who cannot have the benefits of the digital era. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Diego. Thank you, Vice Minister, for showing us what you have been working on and your perspective. I want to thank the panelists. There are some questions in the section of questions and answers. Some are directed directly to Ecuador, Peru, and some others are more open-ended. So there are 18 questions and, sorry, there are 10 questions. Some were answered and some are available to answer, please. Okay, so now we will have Arturo Robles, the Commissioner of Mexico and President of the PCC2. Arturo, you can have the floor. Thank you very much, Oscar. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I want to say hi to everyone, Doreen. I also want to congratulate her for her candidacy for the General Secretariat of the Technological Union, and I want to wish all of the success to her and Minister Muñoz of Ecuador, Diego Carrillo, a colleague, and also the Vice Minister of Peru. Thank you very much, CITEL, for the invitation. I want to thank you in the name of the Institute for this opportunity, which I have to express some points of view on a topic that is also of special interest, particularly now that our region has this challenge, which is to take advantage of the benefits of the digital transformation and take advantage of this opportunity or not and remain unconnected, especially now with the situation of the pandemic of COVID-19, which of course shows that it's important to accelerate the connectivity solutions. And we have some data, for example, in Mexico, in which 77% of the urban area are internet users and 48% of the rural area population are connected to the internet. So half of that do not take advantage of this connectivity. And we have this landscape. The ministry has already shown solutions for operators. And it was recently defined to have a plan for 5 years that was named 2021-2025 roadmap, in which one of the main strategic axes is to work together with the ministry, which is the competent authority for the inclusion, for the digital inclusion and its policies, to try to reach universalization of the services, which since 2013 is part of our constitution and part of the obligations of the state. So let me tell you how we are advancing in this universalization. Many of these have to do with the recommendations that are being done at the regional level right now in the second region for all the organization of the American states. I would like to ask the Secretariat to show on screen the presentation that I sent you, or you could indicate me and I can do it if not.
Yes, you can present and then I will move the slides. Okay, so we start with a recommendation that has to do with the obligations that can be met by providing frequency use, which cannot actually seek gaining profit, but rather to create obligations in each case. The first legal tender process in which the institute set obligations is in the 2.5 band that force obligations for providers to provide access to populations that have between 2,000 and 5,000 inhabitants in those areas of the country that were not protected, and that's in the southeast of Mexico, and over 80% of the population needs to be covered and have connectivity there. We also provided obligations in certain tracts of highways in Mexico, because we have a geographical dispersion, because we have too many mountains and too many areas that are isolated. And because of that, we wanted to make sure that those areas that were not served or unprotected to get connectivity. Now, in the most recent process of regulations that we were created for the AWS, the PCS, and for the 800 megahertz coverage obligations, we decided to have over 30 out of 52